This situation we're in, what has happened in Australia, what the response has been, anti-Semitism in general, because as horrific, distasteful and as outrageous as it is, we need to talk about it, and then talk about this bill, and also talk about how the Coalition think that it could be made stronger. How did we get here, Deputy Speaker? Well, it's interesting. I mean, anti-Semitism is one of the oldest hatreds in the world, but what we thought probably wasn't under the surface in Australia, but to our horror we discovered came after the horrific acts of October the 7th. And everyone was shocked that Israel was attacked by Hamas in the way it was. Shocked the day after, that Sunday, when we all awoke and saw the news that paragliders, four-wheel drive utes, all sorts of vehicles with murderous terrorists had gone into these honestly peaceful kibbutzes and communities in southern Israel and committed the most horrific crimes. And the more the week went on, and as footage was released, it was impossible to watch, but you had to watch it to understand exactly what had happened. It affected many people in this place very personally for their own reasons. In my case, before coming into Parliament, I had worked for an Israeli company as an agricultural scientist for a water technology company called Netafim, and I was very proud to work for that company because that company developed water-saving technology that brought agricultural prosperity to many parts of the world. Yes, in Australia, where we use it to grow tomatoes and almonds, but in also third world countries and developing countries where that Israeli technology that they developed out of necessity, because the people who set up the kibbutz that started Netafim in Hatzerim, down in the south of Israel, they were working with the government to do what the inventor of drip irrigation, Simcha Blas, said was make the desert bloom. And they could make the desert bloom as long as they could use the very small amount of water they had efficiently, so they developed this technology. And that technology is now used around the world, and it brings life to people. And at the time when I spoke about my visits to those Israeli communities, many of them are in the south and many of them are very close to that border, and they make... Netafim's the company that makes the drip irrigation equipment, but there's other companies, like Durot, that makes the valves, the filters, everything that gets water to agricultural crops, as the members for Braddon and the members for Forest well know, because they are farmers. It's all technology that's created in these communities. So they're bringing life to the world through making agricultural produce easier to grow. What they were met... I said at the time they were obsessed with life. What they were met with was people who are obsessed with death. People who have hatreds, impossible to understand hatreds, irrational, insane hatreds, to think that they would cross the border and do those things to people. It's one thing in a war zone to attack one another's soldiers, and often in war there are civilian casualties that happen because of the nature of conflict. But this was people deliberately going and murdering civilians. It should have sparked a great deal of sympathy for the Israeli people that they'd suffered that. Instead, in some quarters in Australia, it unleashed a burgeoning anti-Semitism. And we saw that with the way that people gathered at the Opera House and the chants they were making. We've seen it since, and a lot of that happened before Israel's military response. So for people to come and say, oh, no, we're not protesting, this is an anti-Semitism, We're just against what Israel is doing in their attempts to defend themselves. A lot of this happened before those military operations started. So let's not deny that. But since then, Israel launched some military actions. Now, a debate about what Israel is doing is legitimate. Targeting Australian Jewish people because of it is not. And that's what's been happening. It's happened at the Opera House, it's happened at MP's office, it happened at my office in a small way, and I mention this because I've had experience of it, at the Free Palestine stickers put all over my face and some, text are drawn. But I was disgusted with what happened to my friend, person on the other side, person that I've met since I've come into this place, the member for McNamara, who I play sport with, of a morning up here, and it's been my great honour to get to know. But for him and his staff to go through what they did at his office is against the Foundation's democracy, and it's against a member. Now, the member for McNamara and I disagree on policy, but we are friends, as I am with the member for Hunter, and I felt that. I felt that personally. Now, the response since... Obviously, there's been a great deal of debate about the response since. I thought that the Leader of the Opposition's response has had a real moral clarity to it. He spoke about what was chanted at the Opera House in Parliament, and that was really uncomfortable for all of us. He didn't use the exact words, but he alluded to it. I saw a lot of people around the House, sort of... I think they were critical of the opposition leader bringing it up, but you have to say this stuff to face the evil of it. And he did that, and he's been steadfast since. And I think that he's shown a real leadership on this issue, even when it's got pretty difficult. And I commend him for that. There are people in the Australian Labor Party who have shown some leadership, but overall I would say that the response has been too equivocal. And the Jewish community has felt that the response hasn't been strong enough, and it hasn't had that moral clarity that we need to face this evil. I just want to talk a little bit about anti-Semitism as one of the world's oldest hatreds, and just an experience. You go back in your own mind and try and think, what do I know about this, and what do I understand about this, and what forms my view? And I've talked a bit about my experiences in Israel. But even before that, I remember in the late 80s when I would have been in my early to mid-teens, and as I've said in this place, in the country you only have 2 channels, but I was allowed to watch the late movie sometimes when my parents didn't know that I was up watching the late movie. There was a TV movie on called Escape from Sobibor, and it showed in graphic terms what the Nazis were doing to the Jewish population in Europe in the late 1930s and 1940s, and why the West had the moral clarity to wage war against that evil regime and to stop anti-Semitism in its tracks. I mention that because that's what this sort of thinking, and that's when this sort of evil gets going, that's what it can lead to, what we saw in the 1940s. There's been, as I said, the response from the opposition leader has had a moral clarity, and his writing to the Prime Minister to convene National Cabinet on this was the right move. To push for this sort of thing was the right move, to keep the pressure on, which is what oppositions do. Government take credit for coming out and saying, oh, we're going to do something. Often they do something because of the pressure the opposition puts on them. This is an example of that. This bill has come about because of the pressure applied by the opposition. And I just want to give a shout out to the member of Barara, who has also shown equal moral clarity based on his own experiences. So the bill itself, the changes are welcome. I think they're too late, but we have to do this. We should have done it a long time ago, but we're doing it now. That's a good thing. And there are some simple, straightforward steps that the government are proposing to take, and they lower the threshold for criminality and particularly for those who urge violence against individuals or groups. And instead of intending that violence occur, police now only need to prove that the person was reckless as to whether the violence would occur, and that is a welcome change. And these laws remove the good faith defence for those urging violence. And as the previous speaker, the member for Lyne, said, you can't urge violence in good faith, not in this situation. It's a welcome change. And also there's some expansion of the offences that relate to the urging of violence in relation to a range of personal characteristics on the basis of which a person or group is targeted. I talked about what's happened. I talked about what's happened to MPs' offices, what's happened to what happened on the Opera House, and just the spray painting of cars, the targeting of people because of what they're wearing, which is just, all of this is an anathema to what modern Australian values should be. But the worst thing that happened late last year, and it happened, ironically for me, I was at the Israeli embassy. I was there that day with the Israeli and the German ambassador. They're neighbours in Canberra. The German and the Israel embassies next door to each other. And the two ambassadors came together to commemorate a person from my electorate who in the 1930s, an Indigenous man, a Yorta Yorta man called William Cooper, who took a petition on behalf of the Jewish people in the 1930s to the German consulate in Melbourne and was turned away. A plaque to commemorate him. We celebrated that plaque the very day that there was a synagogue firebombing in Melbourne. So if you didn't need to understand the necessity for these laws and the fact that they need to go further to protect places of worship, then that was your answer of what there needed to be. That synagogue bombing was an outrage. It's really rocked for those of you, and everyone's experiencing that, but there are those of us who are from Victoria and understand that part of Melbourne, Caulfield, Brighton, a lot of those places where the Jewish people have made, who make such a contribution to our region, where they have congregated and they live in Melbourne, and what a contribution they've made, business, arts, to our community. For one of their places of worship to be firebombed by some coward or cowards is an outrage. It goes against everything we believe, all of us want Australia to be. And what we do in this place and the messages we send matter. Now, I hope people get prosecuted. I hope people get caught. I hope they get prosecuted by these laws. I hope that this makes the prosecution of them easier. I hope that this makes the capture of them easier. I hope that this means the punishment can be harsher. But even if it doesn't, the fact that we're passing this legislation is a message from this place to say that anti-Semitism will not be tolerated in Australia. Anti-Semitism is an outrage. It's a hatred that should have died in the ashes of 1945 in World War II, when many of our brave Australian service people, and indeed many from the United States and from the United Kingdom, fought against that evil regime to put a stop to anti-Semitism once and for all. We're seeing it rear its head again here. This parliament needs to send a very strong message that this is not tolerated. This bill's a start, but it needs to go further. We've got some amendments that I hope the government will consider that takes this further. But not only just passing legislation, we've all got to be really, really strong in our statements about this scourge. And I urge the Prime Minister and I urge anyone in a position of leadership to just look at the way that the opposition leader acted in the days when this was getting a foothold, and use that moral clarity to guide you in your attack on anti-Semitism. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.